The village of Ashenvale had no mercy for those who crossed the boundary between the living and the dead. It was a place of muddy roads and thatched rooftops, of church bells that rang before dawn, and fires that never quite warmed the cold that lived inside its people. Nestled between two hills at the edge of an ancient forest so thick the sunlight never reached its floor, Ashenvale was the kind of village that feared what it did not understand and destroyed what it feared. Nirona had grown up memorizing its rhythms, the sound of her mother's spinning wheel in the mornings, the smell of bread baking in the stone oven, the way her father's boots struck the floorboards differently depending on whether his day had been good or cruel. She had learned to read a life made of small signs, and for 22 years those signs had been enough. Then her mother got sick. It began as a cough, a small dry sound that her mother waved away with the back of her hand. "It is nothing, girl. Go feed the chickens." But the cough became a rattle, and the rattle became a silence that was somehow louder than everything else. The color drained from her mother's cheeks the way ink drains from a cloth left too long in rain. The healers came and left with their powders and their prayers and their polite expressions of false hope. The village priest blessed the doorframe and muttered something about God's will. Nirona did not accept God's will. She had tried everything within the world of the living. She had bartered her only silver bracelet for dried mandrake root and wormwood. She had walked 3 hours in freezing rain to reach an old woman who lived alone and was rumored to know remedies no midwife would acknowledge. She had pressed cold cloths to her mother's burning forehead through the night, whispering the same promises over and over, like a prayer she'd invented herself. "Hold on, please hold on." But her mother kept slipping. It was on the 32nd night, she had counted every single one, that Nerona heard the whisper. She was sitting at the edge of the forest, as she sometimes did when the walls of the house felt too close, and the sound of labored breathing became unbearable. The moon was low and pale, the kind of moon that seems borrowed rather than owned by the sky. She had her knees pulled to her chest and her red hair loose around her shoulders, and she was staring at the tree line without really seeing it. There is one way. The voice was not a sound. It was more like a thought that did not belong to her, cool and impossibly clear, arriving between heartbeats. Nirona stiffened. She looked around. The forest was still. "You have exhausted every human remedy. You know this. She will not survive another week." "Who is there?" she whispered. Nothing answered in any visible form, and yet the presence was unmistakable, ancient, patient, and without warmth, like the inside of a stone cathedral in winter. "I offer a cure, a single vial. She will breathe by morning and be walking by the week's end. I have seen sicker women recover." Nirona's hands tightened on her own knees. "And what do you want in return?" "Your humanity." The words settled over her like snow, quietly, without violence, as if they were a perfectly natural thing to say. She did not ask what that meant. Somewhere beneath rational thought, she already knew. She had heard the old stories told by grandmothers around fires, souls bargained away, bodies altered by shadow agreements, the kind of transactions that left no trace except in the changed eyes of the one who made them. "Will it hurt her?" Nirona asked. "The cure. Will it hurt my mother?" "It will heal her entirely." "And me?" A pause, long enough that she nearly took it for silence. "You will wake different. You will not die, but you will be other than what you are." She sat with that for a long time. The wind moved through the grass, an owl called somewhere in the dark, and another answered it from farther away, and the conversation between them felt more real than anything else happening to her. She thought about her mother's hands, the ones that had braided her hair, kneaded bread, stitched the hem of her first dress with small, even stitches. She thought about those hands lying still against a wool blanket, too weak to lift a cup of water. "Give me the vial," Nerona said. She did not remember walking back to the forest's edge. She did not remember the moment the vial appeared, only that it was suddenly in her hand, small, dark, sealed with black wax, warm despite the cold night. It smelled like iron and something older than iron, something without a name. She walked home. She woke her mother carefully, supporting her head with one hand while she broke the seal with the other. Her mother's eyes, glassy and distant with fever, focused on her face for just a moment. "Nerona, drink," she said softly. "Trust me." Her mother drank. Then Nerona went to the barn, lay down on the straw, and felt the world end. It was not dramatic the way dying was in songs. There was no thunder, no vision of paradise or darkness. There was only a long, slow unwinding, a thread being pulled from the center of her, the part of her that had made her warm, that had made her quick to laugh, that had known what it felt like to be hungry or cold or embarrassed or sunburned. All of it unraveled gently and completely, like a dream you cannot hold on to after waking. Then there was nothing. Then there was everything, sharper, louder, stranger. She opened her eyes and the barn was brilliant. She could see the individual veins in the dry straw. She could hear the mice in the walls and the heartbeat of the cow 3 stalls away and the exact rhythm of her mother's breathing in the house, steady and even and strong. She exhaled. The breath came out cold. Her mouth felt odd. She ran her tongue along her teeth and found 2 that had changed. Longer, shaped like purpose rather than accident. She sat up and looked at her hands. They were the same shape, the same fingers. But the skin was different, pale as candle wax, with something dark moving faintly beneath it when she spread her fingers against the gray light of dawn. "The hunger will come," she told herself, the knowledge arriving without invitation. You must not be here when it does, but she could not leave, not before she knew. She crossed the yard and pressed her ear to the door of the house. Inside, she heard her mother rise from bed, heard the floorboards, heard the sound of water being poured, heard impossibly the sound of her mother beginning to hum, a low, ordinary sound, a breakfast sound. Nirona closed her eyes, pressed her forehead to the rough wood of the door. It worked. She let herself have one moment of pure, uncomplicated relief, the kind of emotion she had not felt in months. She breathed it in like air. Then she straightened, wiped her face, and went to knock. Her mother saw her eyes first. The conversation that followed was the worst of Nirona's life, longer, in its way, than anything the entity in the forest had done to her. Her mother's face moving through disbelief, through horror, through something that looked briefly like grief before hardening into something she could not name and could not bear. Her father came, then her brother, then, because the walls of village houses are thin and rumors travel faster than reason, 2 neighbors, then the priest. She tried to explain. She showed them her mother, standing, breathing, healthy. She said the word cure, and the word love, and the word please. None of it mattered. What mattered was the color of her eyes and the temperature of her skin, and the ancient reflexive human terror of the thing that lives past the edge of the fire's light. She did not fight when they took her. She could have. She understood that now, in some quiet part of herself that had catalogued every sound and movement in the room with eerie precision. She could have been through the door and into the forest before any of them drew another breath. But she did not, because some part of her still loved them, even now, even as they bound her wrists with rope, whispering prayers, even as her father refused to look at her, even as her mother, her healed, breathing, standing mother, turned her face away. They marched her to the forest at torchlight. They chose the largest tree they could find, a colossal thing whose roots had split the earth around it like frozen waves, whose bark was dark and heavily grooved, whose canopy blotted out the stars. It had no name in their language. In their stories, it was simply the cursed tree, the place where dark things gathered, where the forest stopped pretending to be safe. They tied her to it facing outward, so she could see the torchlight receding, so she could watch them leave. "This is justice," the priest said. He did not say it to her. He said it to the others. And then they were gone. The forest settled around her like water filling a low place. Slow, complete, inevitable. Nerona sagged against the ropes. The bark was rough against her spine. She could feel the immense life of the tree behind her, some ancient pulse too slow to be a heartbeat, too steady to be accident, as if something enormous had simply chosen to wait here for a very long time. The hunger was beginning now, a pressure behind her eyes, a dry ache in her jaw. She understood instinctively what it wanted, and she turned her face away from it as best she could. So this is how it ends, she thought, saved her, lost everything else. She did not cry. She had cried everything out in the 32 nights before this one. Instead, she listened to the forest, the wind in the upper branches, the distant sound of water, a stream perhaps somewhere deeper in, the sound of something large moving through the undergrowth far to her left, unhurried, unsurprised by her presence. The moon climbed higher, and then, beneath her hands where they pressed flat against the bark, she felt the tree move, not the sway of branches, not the shiver of roots under wind, something else, something deliberate, a shift inside the wood itself, like a door recognizing a key, and the bark behind her split open, silently into light. The light that spilled from the tree was not the light of fire. Nirona had grown up with fire, the unsteady orange warmth of hearths and torches, the way it consumed what it touched, the way it always smelled faintly of its own endings. This was nothing like that. This light was silver white and clean, the kind of light that seemed to come not from a source but from the air itself, as though the space inside the tree had simply decided to be luminous. It pulled outward across the forest floor without casting shadows. It made the roots look like bones and the moss look like velvet, and in the center of it, framed by the edges of the opening like a figure carved into an illuminated manuscript, stood a man. No, not a man. She understood that immediately, with the same instinct that had told her not to run from her family. Some truths bypassed language entirely and arrived already known. He was tall, noticeably taller than anyone she had grown up around, with the particular stillness of someone who had not been startled in a very long time. His hair was black as the space between stars, falling loose to his shoulders with the kind of effortless order that suggested it had simply grown that way. His face was symmetrical to a degree that felt intentional rather than accidental, all fine lines and composed geometry, as though beauty had been applied to him as a craft rather than a gift. His ears came to elegant points, just visible through the dark fall of his hair. But it was his eyes that stopped her breathing. Green, not the green of leaves or grass or any ordinary living thing, but a deeper green, luminous from within, like sunlight filtered through the heart of an old emerald. They moved to her with a slowness that felt deliberate, taking in the ropes at her wrists, the bark against her spine, the disheveled state of her red hair, the paleness of her skin. Then they moved to her eyes, and he was still. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The forest continued around them, the wind, the distant stream, the unhurried darkness beyond the tree's circle of light, entirely indifferent to the fact that two impossible things were looking at one another for the very first time. "You are not supposed to be here," he said at last. His voice was exactly what she might have expected if she had expected anything at all, deep and unhurried, with a quality to it that reminded her of water moving over smooth stone. A voice that had spoken many languages and had stopped being impressed by any of them. "I was tied here," Nerona said. His gaze dropped again to the ropes. Something shifted in his expression, subtle, like a change in the quality of light before rain. "By whom?" "My family." She said it without weight. She was too tired for weight. "They were frightened." "Of what?" She met his eyes steadily. "Of what I am." He studied her for a moment longer, and she had the distinct impression that he was not simply looking at her but reading her, the way a scholar reads a text written in a language they know partially, moving slowly, committing nothing to certainty. "You are a vampire," he said, not a question. "Since last night." Something moved across his face at that. Surprise, perhaps, or its more refined cousin, the expression of someone who has encountered the unexpected and is deciding what to do with it. "Since last night," he repeated quietly. He stepped forward out of the opening onto the forest floor. He moved with the effortless silence of something that had never needed to announce itself. When he reached her, he stopped at a distance that was respectful rather than cautious, though she suspected he was never truly uncautious about anything. He looked at her hands where they were tied against the bark. "You did not fight them." "No." "You could have." "Yes." He looked at her face. "Why didn't you?" The question was genuine, genuinely curious, as if her answer mattered to him in some specific way she could not yet locate. Nirona took a breath she did not need and considered lying. It would have been easier, but she was too exhausted for lies, and something in his green eyes made dishonesty feel like unnecessary effort. "Because I still love them," she said. "Even now, even after." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it, more textured. He was quiet in a way that suggested he was not waiting for more words, but turning hers over carefully, examining them from different angles. Then he reached out and, with a single precise motion, snapped the ropes at her wrists. Not cut, snapped. The fibers parted without effort, with barely a sound. He did it matter-of-factly, the way one might open a door, and stepped back as she brought her arms forward and pressed her freed hands together in her lap. "My name is Aeron," he said. "I am the guardian of this portal." He glanced at the opening in the tree behind him, still softly lit, still patient. "This forest is a border. The tree is a door. I invented the stories about it being cursed so that people would not come close enough to discover what it actually is." Nerona looked at the tree, then at him. "And what is it actually?" "A passage into another world." He said it plainly, without drama. "My world." She absorbed this the way she had absorbed many impossible things in the past 24 hours, with a kind of hollow acceptance, the mind simply refusing to mount any further resistance. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. because you are not going to survive the night out here." He said it without apology, honest rather than cruel. "You transformed less than a full day ago. Your body does not yet know how to regulate itself. The hunger will become unmanageable within the next few hours, and there is no one out here for you to harm, which means you will turn inward. A new vampire that turns inward does not survive." He paused. "I have seen it before." Nerona said nothing. She had felt the hunger growing since she'd woken in the barn, and she had been ignoring it with a focus so fierce it had its own texture. She knew it was there. She knew it was not patient. "And you intend to do what exactly?" she asked. "Bring you inside," he said, "past the portal, where the hunger can be managed without consequence." She looked at the opening in the tree. The light still spilled outward, entirely serene, entirely unhurried, as if it had been waiting. "Your world," she said slowly. "Is it safe for me?" Something crossed his face then, the first expression she could not fully decode. Not dishonesty, but complexity. A man carrying more than one answer to the same question. "Safe is not the word I would choose," he said, "but you have a better chance there than here. My people have resources, knowledge of creatures and conditions beyond the human world." "Your people," she said. "Fae?" He tilted his head slightly. "You know the word." "Old women tell stories," Nirona said. "I have always listened." For the first time, something that was almost a smile moved at the corner of his mouth, brief and carefully controlled like a candle in wind. "Then you know we are not always kind to strangers." "Are you kind to strangers?" He considered this seriously, which she found in some distant part of herself unexpectedly endearing. "I am honest with them," he said, "which is sometimes better and sometimes worse." She looked at her own hands, the skin still faintly pale, the veins still faintly dark. She could feel the pulse of the forest around her, the heartbeats of things, plural, all at different rhythms, the way she imagined a musician might hear individual instruments inside a single piece of music. The hunger followed each pulse like a compass needle following north. "You will turn inward," he had said. She believed him. She had no particular reason to, except that he had spoken every word with the kind of quiet confidence that does not come from wanting to impress anyone. It came from simply knowing things and having no use for pretending otherwise. She thought about her mother humming in the kitchen. She thought about the torchlight walking away. She thought, "I did not sacrifice everything to die tied to a tree before morning." "All right," Nerona said. She stood, slowly, her legs steadier than she expected. She was stronger than she had been. She could feel that too, underneath everything else, the strange new strength of what she had become. It frightened her less than it should have. "I will go with you." He nodded once. He did not say good or wise choice or anything designed to make her feel approved of. He simply turned toward the opening in the tree and waited a half step for her to walk beside him rather than behind him. She noticed that. She noticed it the way she noticed details that mattered, the small architecture of how a person moves through the world. They stepped through together. The world on the other side of the bark was not what the word world had ever meant to her. She had expected something dark, perhaps, something fitting for a place hidden behind the scarred trunk of a forest giant, behind the bones of an old story meant to keep people away. She had expected the underground or the perpetual twilight of a place that had never learned the sun. Instead, she stepped into a sky, not a sky above her, a sky around her, vast and deep and moving, the color of the hour just before full night when blue becomes something too rich to name. Stars she had never seen hung heavy and low, close enough to feel like company rather than distance. The air was different here, warmer and full of something green and growing, the smell of living things that had never been cut or cultivated, but had simply grown according to their own ancient logic. Beneath her feet, the ground was covered in moss, so deep a shade of emerald it seemed to glow. Ahead, at a distance she could not accurately measure, lights floated between enormous trees that made the one they'd walked through look young. Their trunks were wide enough to house entire families, their canopies so high they merged into the star-filled sky above, and between them, wrapped around the roots and the branches and the glowing spaces in between, was a civilization. Bridges of woven wood and living vine, structures built into the living trees rather than imposed upon them, lanterns of pale gold light moving gently without any apparent mechanism for movement. Nerona stood at the threshold and looked at all of it. "What is this place called?" she asked quietly. "Etherwin," Aeron said, standing beside her. "In the old language of my people, it means the world between breathing." She turned to look at him, his profile against the impossible sky, the green of his eyes catching the light of floating lanterns, the weight of something ancient and responsible in the way he held himself. "Will they accept me?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. He looked out at the lights of Etherwin with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one he wore when honesty required more care than speed. "Some will not," he said finally. "There are those among my people who have held their beliefs about vampires for longer than your village has existed." He paused. "But you are under my protection. That carries weight here. And if the weight is not enough?" He turned to look at her then, and his green eyes were steady and unambiguous. "Then we will find more weight," he said. The sanctuary was not a room. It was a space that had grown into itself over centuries, walls of living wood, smooth and warm to the touch, shaped by something more patient than hands. The floor was deep moss, the same impossible emerald as the world outside, and from the ceiling hung clusters of luminous pods that pulsed with a slow, even rhythm, like something breathing. The light they gave was amber soft, the kind of light that made shadows gentle rather than sharp. Aeron led her through a corridor of arched roots so seamlessly joined they looked like cathedral architecture, then down a shallow slope where the air grew warmer and the smell of growing things intensified, green and deep and ancient, the scent of a forest that had never once been afraid of the dark. At the end of the slope, half embedded in the base of an enormous root structure, was a door, not stone, not iron, just wood, shaped and sealed and very, very old. He opened it without a key. He simply pressed his palm flat to the surface and the wood responded. A brief luminescence beneath his hand, and then the door swung inward. Inside, everything was quiet in a way that felt intentional, the kind of quiet that had been built rather than left. "Sit," Aeron said. Not a command, an offering. He gestured to a low structure that served as a bed or a bench or both, covered in layers of dark woven cloth that looked as soft as they turned out to be. Nirona sat. She pressed her palms together between her knees and worked at keeping her face composed, which was becoming increasingly difficult. The hunger had sharpened since they'd crossed the portal. It moved behind her eyes now like heat, and every time she breathed in the warm air of Etherwin, full of life, full of pulse, full of the quiet biological insistence of living things, it answered her with a focus that frightened her in its specificity. She had not harmed anyone. She intended to keep it that way, but intentions she was learning were architecture built on sand when the tide was this high. Aeron moved to the far wall, where shelves had grown directly from the wood, not built into it, but of it, as naturally present as rings inside a trunk. They held vessels of clay and glass, bundles of dried matter she could not name, stoppered bottles of liquid in colors she had no words for. He moved through them with the ease of someone who had spent time here before, selecting without hesitation, gathering things between his long hands with quiet precision. "Can you speak?" he asked without turning. "Tell me what you're experiencing." Nerona considered refusing. Privacy had always been her instinct. She had grown up in a house where emotions were managed quietly, where need was something you carried alone so as not to burden anyone else. But she was past the point where that particular habit served her. "It is like a pressure," she said carefully, "behind my eyes and in my jaw. It knows what it wants and it is becoming less interested in what I want." "How long have you been refusing it?" "Since I woke this morning." He turned from the shelves, holding two items, a clay bowl and a small glass vessel stoppered with dark cork. His expression was focused and unhurried, the same quality of attention he seemed to bring to everything. "That is longer than most manage on the first day," he said. It was not flattery. It was a measurement. "I did not have a choice," Nirona said. "There was no one out there I was willing to hurt." He set the clay bowl on the ground before her and lowered himself to one knee beside it, not in deference, but to work at the right level. He uncorked the glass vessel and poured its contents into the bowl. The liquid was dark and moved thickly, and before she could stop herself, her entire body oriented toward it, with a directness that was profoundly humbling. "It is not human," he said, reading her reaction with the precision of someone accustomed to reading things that did not speak. "It is sourced from creatures of this world, willing contributors, not harmed. The properties are compatible with what you are becoming. It will not satisfy you completely, not yet, but it will reduce the pressure enough for you to think clearly." Nerona looked at the bowl. She looked at her own hands. Then she looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question was genuine and specific. Not "why are you helping me" in the broad sense of a stranger's kindness, but something more precise. Why this? Why here? Why with this particular care? Aeron was quiet for a moment. He set the empty vessel aside and remained where he was, one knee to the ground, his green eyes level with hers. "I have kept that portal for a long time," he said. "Centuries. I have watched humans approach the tree and turn away, frightened by stories I put there deliberately to protect what was behind the bark." A pause. "In all that time, I have never encountered someone tied to it. People are not generally tied to trees they think are cursed," Nerona said dryly. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the material from which smiles are made. "No," he agreed. "They are not." He looked at her steadily. "You were brought there as punishment, for something that, from what I can observe, you did out of love rather than malice, and you did not fight them. You let them bind you and leave you, because you were still trying to protect them from what you had become." He paused. "I have met a great many dark creatures in my years as guardian of that door. I have never met one who was dark by accident and still choosing gentleness." Nerona held his gaze for a moment. The amber light of the sanctuary moved across his face with the slow pulse of the pods above. Then she looked at the bowl. "All right," she said quietly. She drank. The effect was not immediate. It moved through her slowly, the way warmth moves through cold hands, spreading from the center outward. gradual, and thorough. The sharpness behind her eyes eased. The pressure in her jaw released its grip by increments. And with those physical urgencies quieting, something else emerged. Something she had been holding at bay with the same energy she'd been using to hold back the hunger. Grief. It came without drama. She did not weep loudly. It was more like a long exhale, something that had needed to leave her body for hours, finally finding an exit. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and sat with it. This grief that was not just for what she had lost, but for how she had lost it. Not to cruelty or misunderstanding, exactly, but to the limit of what love could hold when it was afraid. Aeron did not move away. He also did not move closer. He simply remained nearby, giving her the particular gift of presence without intrusion. After a while, she lowered her hand. "Tell me about this world," she said. It was partly genuine curiosity, partly the need to give her mind something structural to hold on to while the grief settled into its new position, permanent, bearable, below the waterline. He sat back then, settling on the moss beside her with an ease that suggested he spent considerable time sitting on floors, which somehow endeared him to her. Etherwin exists in the space between the living world and what comes after it, he began. It is not heaven and it is not the underworld. It is older than either concept. My people have been here since before your world had a name for itself. He paused, choosing his next words with care. We are long-lived, almost impossibly so, by human measure. We have our own laws, our own hierarchies, our own histories, and we have strong feelings about what belongs here and what does not. Vampires do not belong here, Nerona said. That is the common belief, he said, not agreeing, not disagreeing. The history between Fae and vampires is old and largely unpleasant. There were conflicts in the early centuries when the boundaries between worlds were less structured than they are now. Things were done that are not easily forgotten by people who live long enough to remember everything. And you? Nirona asked. What is your belief? He looked at her with those green eyes that seemed always to be doing more than looking. I am the guardian of a portal, he said. My role requires me to see things as they actually are, rather than as tradition describes them. It is not always a comfortable position. He paused. I believe that what a creature does is more significant than what it is. This is not a popular position among my people. Is that why you brought me here? Your philosophy? Partly. He held her gaze. And partly because I wanted to. The admission arrived plainly, without apparent embarrassment. He said it the way he said everything, as simple fact, offered without apology or embellishment. Nerona looked away first, not from discomfort exactly, from a feeling she did not yet have a reliable name for, one that lived in approximately the same location in her chest where warmth used to live before warmth became complicated. Tell me about yourself, he said, not what you became, who you were. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she wanted to answer. She talked about the village, about her mother's hands and her father's boots, and the way bread smelled in the morning when everything was still simple. She talked about the 32 nights and the healer's polite hopelessness, and the old woman in the rain. She talked about the whisper at the forest's edge, the cool voice, the dark vial, the choice made in the grammar of love rather than logic. She talked about waking in the barn and knowing immediately that it had worked. I heard her humming, Nirona said, through the door. I could not go inside because the hunger had already begun and I would not risk it. But I pressed my head to the wood and I heard her humming while she poured her morning water, and for one moment that was enough. It was exactly enough. The sanctuary was very quiet. And then they came, Aeron said. And then they came. He was quiet for a long moment. His gaze had moved to the middle distance, the way it did when he was processing something internally rather than looking at anything specific. The folklore of your world, he said at last, has never been kind to vampires. It has made monsters of them systematically, creatures of pure appetite, of corruption, of death imported into the living world. I have observed this from the other side of that portal for a very long time. He paused. What the folklore neglects is that the oldest vampire accounts are more complicated. The first accounts describe creatures of transformation, not destruction. Beings who crossed the boundary between life and death for reasons, who carried their human selves into what came after. Nerona looked at him. You have studied this, she said. I am a guardian. Knowledge is what I use instead of walls. His eyes returned to her. You are not what they made you in their stories, Nerona. You are someone who loved a person so completely that you rewrote your own nature to save her. That is not corruption. That is the most human thing I have ever witnessed. He paused, and something shifted in his voice, subtle and precise. And you are no longer entirely human, which makes you something more interesting than either category. She looked at him for a long moment in the amber light of the sanctuary. Outside, somewhere in the vast architecture of Etherwin, she could hear the distant sounds of a world going about its ancient business. Voices in a language she did not know, the movement of things through living spaces, the particular music of a civilization that had never needed to hurry. She was tired, deeply, fundamentally tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I should rest, she said. Yes, he agreed. He rose smoothly, without effort. I will be outside. The door locks from the inside. Press your palm to the lower panel. No one will disturb you. He moved toward the door. She watched him. Aeron. He paused, one hand light on the frame. Thank you, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once. The same nod he had given when she agreed to come through the portal. Simple, sufficient. The door closed softly behind him. Nerona lay back on the dark woven cloth and looked up at the breathing amber light of the pods above her. The hunger was quiet, the grief was settled. The world she had come from was a closed door, and the world she was in was enormous and unknown and, against all reason, not entirely unwelcoming. She thought about green eyes and honest voices and the way someone had snapped her ropes as casually as opening a window. Then she let the impossible day pull her under and slept. She felt it before she heard it. A wrongness in the air, not the wrongness of something unfamiliar, but something far more specific. The wrongness of something that did not belong here, pressing itself into here anyway, the way infection moves into a clean wound. The amber light of the sanctuary flickered. The moss beneath her feet shivered. The breathing pods above dimmed once, twice, then held at half their usual brightness, as though the room itself had instinctively pulled back from something. Nirona was on her feet before she was fully awake. The door to the sanctuary was open. She did not remember opening it, but Aeron was there in the corridor, already turned toward the source of what she was feeling. His posture changed, no longer the composed ease of a guardian at rest, but something older and more alert, every line of him drawn tight with a readiness she had not seen in him before. You feel it, he said without turning. Yes. She moved to stand beside him. What is it? He was quiet for a moment. The air in the corridor was moving now, a slow cold current that had no business existing inside a living structure, threading past them like the exhalation of something enormous. "Something followed you through the portal," he said. The words settled over her like cold water. The entity. She had not thought of it since the night at the forest's edge, had not allowed herself to think of it, because thinking of it meant acknowledging that the transaction between them might not have been complete the moment she woke in the barn with a changed body and a dark vial in her hand. She had assumed the exchange was finished, a life for a life, a humanity for a cure. She had been naive. "It has never breached the portal before," Aeron said quietly. His voice was controlled, but she heard what lived beneath the control. A sharp, clean anger, and beneath that, something rarer, uncertainty. "In all the centuries I have held this door, nothing from that side of the veil has found its way through without my permission." "It found its way through because of me," Nerona said. He did not contradict her. The honesty she had come to expect from him extended, apparently, to this. "You are its investment," he said. "It made an agreement with you. Whatever it is, whatever class of entity bargains in humanity rather than gold, it considers you unfinished business. Then it is here for me," she said, "not for Etherwin." "It may not distinguish," Aeron said. "Things that cross between worlds without using proper doors tend to be imprecise." They moved through the corridor together, following the cold current, and emerged into the outer levels of Etherwin, the spaces where the great trees opened into plazas of woven light and ancient stone. The world around them had changed. The floating lanterns had gone dark. The voices she had fallen asleep to were gone. In their place was silence so complete it had a texture, the kind of silence that precedes not weather, but something older than weather. The Fae of Etherwin were gathered at the edges of the central plaza. Dozens of them, luminous-eyed and long-limbed and deeply, visibly unsettled. Some held weapons she had no names for, things that were partly light, partly material, partly something in between. They were looking at the center of the plaza. Nerona looked. At the center, the stone that had been smooth and ancient and mossy was blackened in a rough circle, and above the blackened stone, the air had thickened into something visible, a dark distortion, like the space between moments made physical, like the shadow of something that existed mostly in dimensions that did not have names. It was not a shape, or rather, it was too many shapes, shifting between them too quickly for the eye to settle. But its presence was unmistakable. She had felt it before, at the forest's edge, cool and impossibly clear and without warmth. Standing closest to it, directly in the path of what the distortion was doing to the air around it, was a woman, slender, silver-haired, robed in the colors of Etherwin, deep greens and old golds. She stood very still, not by choice but because the distortion had surrounded her, the dark air curling around her like smoke around a candle. Her eyes were open and her expression was not fear. It was the particular dignity of someone who refuses to give fear to a thing that wants it. Aeron stopped walking. Nirona had learned to read him in a short time, but she had never seen his face do what it did in that moment. Everything he kept contained and composed came briefly, completely undone, just for a second before he locked it away again. But she saw it. "Who is she?" Nerona asked very quietly. "My mother," he said. He moved before she could respond. What he did was not quite running. It was something more purposeful than that. a straight and silent motion across the plaza, and the Fae around the edges pulled back to let him through. He was speaking before he reached the center, words in the old language of his people that moved through the air like something physical, syllables that carried weight and direction. Light began to gather at his hands, not the gentle silver white of the portal or the amber of the sanctuary, but something colder and more structured, geometric almost, the magic of a mind trained to precision rather than emotion. The dark distortion turned. She felt it turn. Not saw, felt. A shift in pressure. A reorientation of something that perceived the world through means other than eyes. It recognized him. And then it went still in a way that was not peace but patience, the stillness of something that has identified a more interesting target. Then it moved toward his mother with sudden, devastating directness. Nerona was already running. She did not think about it. She did not calculate the distance or the danger or the fact that she had been a vampire for less than 2 days and had no idea what she was capable of withstanding. She had spent 32 nights running towards something because someone she loved was in danger, and the body, it turned out, remembered that grammar, even when the mind had not caught up. She crossed the plaza and threw herself between Aeron's mother and the dark distortion at the moment it struck. The impact was nothing like pain. Pain had edges. This did not. It was more like being the place where 2 opposing pressures met, the space inside a wave where the water cannot decide which direction it is moving. It moved through her in a cold, comprehensive sweep, touching every part of what she was, the human remnant and the new dark nature both, and pulling at them simultaneously, as though testing whether either would give. She heard someone shout. She thought it was Aeron. Then the cold found her center and she felt herself begin to come apart. She did not lose consciousness entirely. That was almost worse. She was aware of the stone floor beneath her, aware of voices, many voices, and beneath them one that was closer and lower and speaking with a controlled urgency that was the closest thing to panic she had ever heard from him. She was aware of her own hands, which were shaking, and of the hunger, which had returned with a force that made every previous iteration of it feel like a suggestion. And she was aware of him, kneeling beside her, his face above hers, and in his eyes, both of them fully, without the careful management he usually applied, something that was not guardian composure or philosophical interest or even simple human kindness. Something much less manageable than any of those things. Nirona, his voice, close. Stay with me. Look at me. She looked at him. It was not difficult. What did it do? She asked. Her voice sounded distant from itself. It destabilized your essence, he said. His hands were at her face, her shoulders, not frantic, but precise, moving with the specific efficiency of someone who knows what they are looking for. The human part and the vampire part are separating. If they fully separate, he stopped. Tell me, she said. You will not survive it. She held his gaze. Around them, the distortion had retreated. She was dimly aware of other Fae engaging it, the cold light of their magic pushing it back. But she could not give attention to anything beyond the immediate geography of his face and what he was deciding behind his eyes. There is something I can do, he said. It has never been done. Between a Fae and a vampire, there is no precedent, and my people will... He stopped himself. Made a choice that she could see him making, visible as the turning of a wheel. There is a pool in the deep sanctuary, ancient water, fed by the roots of Etherwin itself. It can stabilize a broken essence, hold the parts together while they relearn how to be whole, but it takes time, months perhaps. And the other thing, she asked, the thing that has never been done. His jaw tightened. To get you to the pool in your current condition, your essence needs a bridge, something to hold the two halves together long enough to survive the transfer. He paused. A fae can share essence, a portion of what we are, transferred through contact. It is not a small thing. She understood what he was not saying. She understood it the way she understood most things about him, not from the words, but from the shape of the silence around them. Will it hurt you? She asked. No, he said. That is not what I asked. He held her gaze for a long moment. It will change things, he said finally. Between us. It is not reversible. A portion of what I am will be part of what you are, permanently. My people consider it, he exhaled. It is not something done between strangers. We are not strangers, Nerona said. Something moved across his face, broke the surface just briefly before he could gather it back. No, he said quietly. We are not. Then do it, she said. Aeron, do it. He held her face in his hands. His eyes were the most present she had ever seen them. No distance, no careful management, no centuries of composure between him and this moment. Just him, entirely here, looking at her as though she were the most real thing in a world full of ancient and extraordinary things. He kissed her. It was gentle and deliberate, and nothing like anything she had experienced before, because it was not only a kiss. She felt the moment the essence transferred, a warmth that did not belong to temperature, that moved through her from the point of contact and spread outward in a slow, thorough wave, reaching into the cold, separating places and holding them, like hands cupped around a flame in wind, like roots finding water in dry earth. The shaking in her hands stopped. She felt herself, both selves, the human memory and the dark new nature, settle into each other, reluctant but held, like two pieces of something that had been apart long enough to forget they fit. He pulled back slowly. His eyes were still on hers. We need to get you to the pool, he said. His voice was not entirely steady. She chose not to mention it. All right, she said. He lifted her without effort and carried her into the deep sanctuary, and neither of them spoke, because some things do not need words yet. They need time and roots and the slow patience of ancient water. She slept inside the pool. That was the only way she could describe it afterward. Not floating, not waiting, but a deep and absolute sleep, the kind that comes after the hardest thing a person has ever done. The water was warm and luminous, the palest gold, and she was dimly aware of it the way one is dimly aware of breathing, as a fact rather than an experience. Time did not move the same way inside the pool. Days became textures rather than units. The hunger quieted entirely. The cold retreated. She healed. She did not know it was morning when she woke. There was no morning in the deep sanctuary, only the steady, gentle light of Etherwin's ancient roots feeding the pool from below. But something in her knew that enough time had passed. The way a seed knows spring without having any mechanism for knowing anything. She surfaced slowly. The water fell from her hair in pale gold sheets. She climbed from the pool onto the moss and sat with her knees drawn up, looking at her hands, which were steady and pale and threaded through with veins that were no longer dark, but something in between, something new, something that did not have a name yet. She felt different, complete in a way she had not been before, both parts of herself present and settled, held together by something warm that lived in her chest, slightly to the left of center. She knew, without examining it, what that warmth was. She turned. He was there. He had fallen asleep sitting against the root beside the pool, his back to the ancient wood, his long legs stretched before him, his head tilted slightly to one side, his black hair loose around his shoulders. His hands were open in his lap. The careful composure he maintained in waking was gone entirely, and what remained was simply him, younger looking, or at least softer, the centuries sitting more lightly on a face that was not organizing itself for anything. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the ropes he had snapped without ceremony, the bowl set on the floor without condescension, the honest voice that had never once told her what she wanted to hear when the truth was more useful. The way he had said, "We are not strangers," back to her, as though she had confirmed something he had been quietly certain of for longer than he'd said. She thought about a kiss that had been both more and less than a kiss, about warmth that was still with her, would always be with her. Without thinking, which was the most honest way she ever did anything, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek. He woke. She watched him cross the distance from sleep to wakefulness in a single breath. His eyes opened, the composure returned, and then immediately dissolved again when he saw her sitting beside the pool, whole and present, and looking at him with eyes that were still red dark but warm with something that had nothing to do with hunger. For the first time in the days she had known him, she watched Aeron be entirely surprised. "You are," he began. "Awake," she said. "Yes." He straightened. His eyes moved over her face with an intensity that was not the careful reading of before, but something unguarded and direct and slightly overwhelmed. "How long?" she asked. 4 months, he said, "and 11 days. She absorbed that. He had been counting. She looked at him. This ancient, careful, quietly extraordinary person who had snapped her ropes and fed her from a clay bowl, and shared the irreversible warmth of himself to hold her together. And something in her that had been folded, small and careful for a very long time, simply opened. She leaned forward and kissed him on the mouth. He was still for exactly 1 breath. Then he kissed her back, and it was nothing like the careful deliberateness of the portal night. It was warmer than that, less structured. The difference between a choice made under urgency and a choice made freely. His hand came to her face and her hand found his, and between them the warmth that lived slightly left of center in her chest said, simply and without ambiguity, "Yes, this, here." When they separated, the deep sanctuary was very quiet and very full of light. He rested his forehead against hers. "My people," he said, "are going to have a great deal to say about this." "I know," she said. "I do not particularly care," he said. She smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in longer than she could accurately measure, and it felt like a door opening, not into something unknown, but into something she had been walking toward for 4 months and 11 days without knowing she was walking at all. "Neither do I," she said. Outside the deep sanctuary, Etherwin breathed its slow, ancient breath. The roots held, the water was still. The world between breathing continued, patient and luminous, making room, as old things sometimes do, for something it had never contained before. A vampire who had loved too much to save herself. A guardian who had spent centuries watching a door and finally found a reason to step through it. And between them, quietly and permanently, The beginning of something that had no precedent, no folklore, and no map. Only the warmth, only the choice, only the morning arriving at last on the other side of every dark thing. She had given her humanity to save her mother's life. She had lost her family to gain it. She had been tied to a cursed tree at the edge of a world that feared her. And through the bark of that ancient door, she had found the only thing she had never thought to ask for. Not forgiveness, not belonging, not even safety. Just someone who looked at everything she was, the sacrifice and the darkness and the love that had cost her everything, and said, "Yes, I see you and I choose to remain." Some stories end in fire, some end in stone. This one ended in gold water and old roots and a kiss that had no word in any language, fey or human, old or new, which is perhaps the only way the best ones ever end.